If you take a look at the Chinese economic model, what you see is a system of state support that is built to dominate and take over entire industries. So this is what I mean by we've seen the pattern. Steel and aluminum, solar panels, batteries, EVs. Today, China's production capacity in steel is 55% of world capacity. That's in one country. Aluminum, 60%. EVs, 60%. Solar, 80%. And in certain critical minerals, 85 to 95%.
So the US is panicking over China's control of supply chains. Beijing is dominating many industries today. The steel industry, global shipping, electric vehicles, and solar panels. While the G7 was sleeping, China was building out their supply chains, and now they have cornered the market, multiple markets. All the trade tariffs, barriers, and restrictions, they are a collective freakout. But something disturbing is being floated around. The West is now targeting China's overcapacity in plastic production. That China's plastic production is a global issue that needs to be addressed. Cheap plastic exports are hurting Western economies now. This is dangerous because now we have gone past high-tech goods into low-value products. China making plastic toys and nylon shirts is now the big boogeyman. We are truly witnessing a total decoupling of the West and anything Chinese. It's important to remember that companies in the US in the West, they happily outsource all this low-value manufacturing to Beijing. The idea was rather simple. Use cheap Chinese labor to produce the unglamorous stuff like plastic bags. They make all the cheap stuff while we climb the value chain. And that was the playbook when China entered the World Trade Organization. But when you give up an entire industry, there are consequences to be had. China produces more petrochemicals than it needs, and these are the feedstocks, the inputs needed for plastic production. By next year, China's production will be more than their capacity, and this is across the board. Propellant, methanol, and glycol, China will have excess capacity in almost every category. They can take care of their domestic economy and supply the world with plastics at the same time. Is that really so bad? China adding more supply to the global economy means prices will come down. There's a reason why the West, especially the US, is sounding the alarm, because they are about to lose yet another industry to the Chinese. For many years, Chinese companies were net importers of plastics. They made some, but they bought more from places like America. But since March 2024, China is now a net exporter of key plastic products. They are starting to challenge a $300 billion industry in the US, and we all know what that means. Sooner or later, doesn't matter who wins the elections, punishments will likely come. Whether it's tariffs or quota restrictions, the trade war is going to escalate. Now, this is very dangerous because the world is suffering from an inflation crisis. Whether it's shampoos, diapers, or just the packaging itself, a ton of stuff requires petrochemicals. Plastics are definitely involved.
I just looked through my Walmart history and I found this Walmart order from 2 years ago for the whole month worth of groceries. 45 items cost $126. A whole month of groceries just for me, basically. But I did notice this reorder all button, and I wanted to see how much it would cost now. Now, this order of 45 items for 1 month would have cost $414. That is 4 times more.
Just look at your grocery bill, guys. I bet things are 100% more expensive than a few years back. Chinese plastics flooding the world will export deflation. And if you ban them, inflation will get worse everywhere else. But it doesn't really matter now, right? The US is afraid of their industries losing market share. And it goes without saying that the cost of manufacturing in America is incredibly high. Since January last year, plastic manufacturing has been losing jobs. They lost over 10,000 jobs and more are at risk if China floods the world with exports. The US exports around $70 billion worth of plastic products. It's very likely that the G7 will impose more trade tariffs on China. The same thing that happened to Chinese EVs, will hit plastic imports too, just a matter of time. But here's a critical question. Why did China's plastic exports suddenly explode over the past 2 years? Who's really at fault here? Over the past 3 years, China has been increasing their petrochemical capacity. It has grown by over 9 million tons a year. That's more than the G7 and the rest of Asia combined. A big question is why? Subsidies definitely play a part for sure, but so do profit margins. If there's no profit, no company will manufacture stuff. Here's the kicker. To make petrochemicals, you need oil products like naphtha. China has the world's biggest refining capacity, and Russia is their biggest oil supplier. And thanks to Western sanctions, Moscow has no choice but to divert a ton of oil to Beijing. And because of this oversupply, China had the bargaining power to push prices down. China has been buying a ton of cheap Russian crude. The discounts hit an incredible 19% at its peak. You combine this with cheap labor and the abundance of refineries, the input costs are much lower. That's a key reason why China is now a net exporter of plastics. Their cost of raw materials and refining is extremely low versus the West. Thanks to the economic war, they can outproduce low-cost products and export them out. Once again, this is the effect of sanctions backfiring. How many times must we go through this? These are second-order effects that are starting to manifest. Chinese plastics are coming, but another export is making the West really afraid, is making them panic, and that is cheap fertilizers from Russia. A flood of cheap Russian exports are entering the EU markets, and according to experts there, this threatens Europe's food security, which to be honest is a little weird. We know farmers are protesting around Europe, costs are rising, taxes are too high, and all the environmental rules there are too restrictive. So cheap Russian fertilizers should be a boon to the industry. Farmers should benefit from increase in supply. So who's really complaining? Well, it's the producers of European fertilizers. Listen to Germany's largest ammonia company. Russian exports are cheaper than our fertilizers. They pay peanuts for natural gas in comparison to EU producers. What have we been saying for almost 2 years now? Sanctions, especially in energy, have big consequences. It's not just prices at the pump going up. Other products dependent on oil and gas also rise as well. And a big shout out to our sponsor today, Indigo Precious Metals. When it comes to buying gold and silver, I trust Indigo Precious Metals in Singapore. They have made investing in precious metals safe, fast, easy, and simple for both small and large scale buying. I've been stacking gold for over a decade now, and I've learned two things when buying. You want to buy authentic gold bullion, and you want to buy it at the lowest premium possible to stretch your dollars even further. And I'm glad to say I found both of this at Indigo Precious Metals. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world today. We have geopolitical chaos and the values of fiat currencies getting debased. Inflation is not gonna end, and that's why I consistently buy gold to preserve my wealth. Indigo Precious Metals is a leading retailer in Singapore. They specialize in physical gold, silver, and platinum. They are my one-stop shop when it comes to buying bullion. Their prices are sharp, and they have the best brands on sale, and I can test the gold on the spot. So if you're looking to make your first gold purchase, Indigo Precious Metals is the best place to start. Whether it's 1 ounce or 1 kilo, this is the reputable dealer you are looking for. So take action today. Click on the link below and enjoy a discount on your first purchase with the code SeanFu. Start your gold stacking journey today. To make fertilizers, you need ammonia, and 70% of ammonia production depends on natural gas, which Russia has in abundance. Russia's cost of production is extremely low to begin with, and after the Nord Stream explosion, Germany and most of Europe lost access to cheap Russian gas. So manufacturing ammonia isn't competitive anymore. It's not rocket science here, it's simple cause and effect. The EU is making it worse by importing expensive LNG from Qatar and all the way from the US. It's no surprise that their fertilizers can't compete with Russian exports. There's a food crisis in the world today, and Europe has pledged their support to solve it.
And 30% of Ukraine's grain exports are going immediately to low and middle income countries in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Asia. So I think it's very important that we set the record straight. It is Putin who created with his war the food crisis, and it is Europe that is working to end it.
So the EU has to choose. To lower food prices and produce more grain, you need Russian fertilizers. If the West decides to ban Russian exports to protect their industries, this will jack up the price of food. Ukrainian or Russian grain isn't enough. Europe needs cheap fertilizers to grow more food themselves, and that will lower costs and allow the EU to export more to countries like Egypt. In Q1 alone, the EU imported 560,000 tons of Russian fertilizers. That's almost as much as the first 6 months of 2023, which means by the end of the year, Russian imports will easily exceed 1 million tons. It might even hit 1.5 million, a new record. So you can see how dependent the bloc is. If they didn't bring them in, prices would go through the roof. Yes, Russian oil and gas has gone down, but another critical import has gone up. The EU simply swapped one dependency for another. And speaking of panic, let's talk about another G7 country, because it seems the hammer is going to fall on Chinese EVs once again. The US has imposed huge tariffs on EVs from China, and now Canada is about to join the punishments. Trudeau's government is going to curb EV imports and follow Biden's move. The consultation has begun, and just like the EU, tariffs will be next in line. Their finance minister just confirmed this. Canada is going to escalate the trade war with China. On the surface, this sounds really bizarre. Canada doesn't have their own car brands. We can kind of understand why the US or the EU wants to impose tariffs. Volkswagen, Mercedes, Ford, Chrysler, Tesla, they're all at risk. If Chinese vehicles swarm in, they will eat up market share. But there are no Canadian car brands, so why? What is really going on? We just need to follow the money. It was never about climate change, that was just a convenient excuse. Canada's auto industry accounts for 10% of manufacturing GDP and 21% of trade. Most of these are factories churning out cars for the US. Many of the G7 automakers are concentrated in Canada. Ford and General Motors are there. Stellantis from Europe has a factory there. Japan's Honda and Toyota have facilities in Canada as well. Canada was essentially piggybacking on the US auto industry. It's a big reason why the Canadian economy was growing and why they didn't need any domestic car brands. Their auto industry accounts for nearly 600,000 jobs. That's a lot. It represents $63 billion in exports. That's the second biggest export industry in Canada, just below energy. So you can imagine the pressure the government is under. Chinese EVs will most definitely be cheaper, and that will decimate demand for US cars and wreck the Canadian auto industry. We are seeing North America closing their doors to China. It's a decoupling of critical industries, and it's only going to get worse. It's cars today, but it will be plastics tomorrow and the day after, probably underwear and toilet paper. But Canada is flirting with danger. Business with China has been growing fast since 2020. Beijing represents around 10% of its total trade. Retaliations could come. Just like the EU, China could target soft parts of the Canadian economy. Sure, their auto industry in Canada might be well protected, but it will come at the expense of other industries. Decoupling isn't going to stop, it's only going to get worse. So expect a bifurcation of trade. Western markets are putting up a ton of barriers on anything Chinese. We said before that EVs are just a start, and true enough, other sectors are now being targeted. But the craziest will be Chinese plastics. That will drive inflation through the roof. Nothing is off limits anymore. And if you think we are joking, check this out. US golf cart producers are targeting China. They are accusing Beijing of dumping golf carts into America. You can't make this stuff up. A big tariff war is coming on everything Chinese. But the big losers will be the US consumer. The Western taxpayer will be paying even higher prices for everything. So get ready for even bigger trade war. It's going to get messier and even more ridiculous. The West is going to decouple from China and vice versa. But as always, let me know what you think. Will the G7 target Chinese plastics next? And what will be the next target? Underwear and socks from China? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.